anything. Hi, this is
Cool.
Paul, and this is Redeemed Zoomer, a young man who started a YouTube channel and has a pretty significant media presence. Your first video that sort of took off was what it was sort of like all of these. It's kind of like Christianity explained in 20 minutes, all of the different parts of the tree. Was that the first video that of yours that sort of took off?
Well, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. My first videos that really took off were my church history video, like the
Yeah.
history of Christianity, and then all Christian denominations explained. Those were the ones that really took off because for some reason everyone's curious about different denominations these days.
Well, I think they're just a mystery to people. I mean, when
Yeah.
I first got to this church, the name of the church was Sacramento Christian Reformed Church. And
hmm
even though it had been the name of this church for 40 years, I regularly bumped into people who would, well, what kind of a church is it? And if you say something like Protestant, they look at you like, I have no idea what that word means. And, so even just that word alone for a large percentage of people that will walk down the street, complete blank. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
and you had a
that's
gift in that video for, you were really economical. It was like bang, 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 bang. And there were good summaries. So I thought it was really good.
yeah, thank you. I like to try and see if I can explain things for people who have attention spans as short as my generation does.
Well, you're a young man, so it shouldn't take too long to get into your biography, which is what I usually do. So, well, tell me a little bit about the home you grew up in.
Right. So I'm from New York. I'm from the New York City area, and I came from a very, secular region. Where I grew up, basically everyone my age was non-religious.
Yep.
Some people were nominally Catholic or Jewish, but all that really means is do you open presents on Christmas or Hanukkah? And I grew up. This wasn't due to how my parents
Where
raised me.
exactly? Because I grew up in Patterson, New Jersey, so I grew up just outside
Really?
of New York City.
Do you know like Westchester County outside of New
Yeah,
York City?
yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm from.
Okay.
So I mean, you're near Terrytown, like the Tappan Zee Bridge. That's
Yep.
that's that's my hometown. So I was pretty anti-religious growing up. I was very into, left-wing politics because that really was the religion of my time and place. Um, just broad leftism. I wasn't like an expert on political theory or anything. I called myself a socialist, the same reason all teenage boys do because I liked the Soviet anthem, not because I had actually read any Marx or Lenin. And there's a lot of LARPing, a lot of LARPing. But then I converted to Christianity when I went to a summer camp in the Midwest. It was a music camp because I'm a musician, but it had a Christian theme. It was run by a Christian Oberlin professor. And I converted to Christianity there after meeting a lot of other Christians my age, which I hadn't really met in New York. So the director of that camp was a PCUSA Presbyterian, and I had some background in Presbyterianism because my family was visiting a PCA Presbyterian church on and off. So I decided to join my local Presbyterian church. I didn't know anything about the denominational politics. I barely had any idea about the theological differences between traditions. I just felt like Presbyterianism was the home for me. Um, and it wasn't until a year or so after being there that I really started to struggle with my faith, because my high school was still very secular, and as soon as I started to switch from Christian to leftist, I got basically excluded from my friend group for that, and if you in most high schools if you get excluded from one group you can't join another one, you're basically alone for the rest of high school,
Wow.
and I got canceled, so to speak, in high
What
school, so I was
tell me
alone.
in a little bit more detail what that looked like. I mean, did you not get invited to things? Did people give you the cold shoulder? Did they cuss you out? Did they call you names? I mean, what exactly did that look like?
Yeah, so it started with suspicion when I became Christian. Like my Jewish friends would just make, disrespectful jokes about Christianity, and then I got offended, and they were like, "Wait, I can't do that," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm Christian now." And they were a bit surprised. So it started with suspicion. They were like, "Okay, I hope you're not one of those homophobic Christians." And at the time, I didn't think I was. At the time, I was just like, "Oh no, for me, Christianity just means being nice to everyone." And they were like, "Okay, but we're watching you." So it started with suspicion. people started to make jokes about, oh yeah, Richard's he's the church guy now. He goes to church. He's such a um and then so that means the second I started to question some of the left-wing narrative, the second I was like, are there really 76 genders? Because that was not only what my friends believed, it was what my teachers were teaching us. Um, the second I started to question that, then they started gossiping and spreading rumors and saying, "Oh, Richard is super homophobic. He's transphobic. He's queerphobic." And then after a while, I started like, I mean, I was still technically friends with them, but I could tell they didn't want to hang out with me.
Yeah.
So eventually, I heard secondhand, third hand that none of them wanted to hang out with me anymore. So
Mm,
that was that. And then for the rest of high school, I was pretty much alone. And
mm,
I had a lot of intellectual doubts about my faith because, you're surrounded by atheists all around. You get a lot of intellectual challenges.
yeah.
But that drove me to start studying theology. So I got into Reformed theology. I had a mentor at my PCUSA church who was really into Reformed theology. He helped me. Listening to Tim Keller helped me a lot as well. And over the course of high school, I deconstructed my leftist upbringing and adopted more and more Reformed Christian ideas.
Talk to me about, see, now, so I'm born, raised, multi-generational in the Christian Reformed Church.
Yeah.
So when we hear PCUSA and you're deconstructing from leftism, a whole bunch of people are going to say, now, wait a minute, he's talking PCUSA. You're going to have to get a little higher resolution on this. Tell me about your local PCUSA church and how you're getting into someone like Tim Keller, because for many in the PCUSA, for as popular and urbane as Tim Keller was, he was often met with a great deal of suspicion because, of course, he was. I should flesh this out a little bit. PCUSA is the mainline Presbyterian church in the United States.
Yeah.
PCA is a split off, one of the split offs of the PCUSA. And, you have some, I mean, there's the OPC. I mean, again, he's got
There's a lot.
videos on eliminating a bunch of these things. And I know for many people, all of these denominations are alphabet soup, but it sounds like you basically have been catechized in a PCUSA church.
Pretty much. So when I first joined my PCUSA church, it had a pastor who was very moderate. So his sermons didn't have any liberal language or rhetoric. His sermons were just generic American mainline sermons, and I didn't know enough theology to detect any red flags if there were some. He retired after 1 year, and then the following year we got an interim pastor, and she went to Union Theological Seminary. She was from the UCC, and as you can imagine, she was extremely liberal. And at that point, I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. I didn't know much theology, but a lot of things she said, like she said, oh, saying I believe the Bible is like saying I believe the New York Public Library. The Bible has a lot of contradictions. And then she also said, like, it doesn't matter whether the resurrection happened historically. Most of her sermons were a challenge of traditional Christian beliefs rather than preaching traditional Christian beliefs. Um, so I was still learning stuff, so I talked to her about it, and she told me to investigate progressive Christianity, and I did, and I just found like this is not that much different than atheism. This is just not that much different than I struggled to see how it was any different than atheism at all. It's basically atheists who thought Jesus was a nice social justice activist, but he wasn't even that. So they're just misinterpreting everything. But luckily, my church was more than her. My church also had very solid people, and when I was being confirmed in my church, I was assigned a mentor, and he was a super smart guy. He's this Columbia professor, and really into Reformed theology, and he taught me all about it. And at first, when I heard about Calvinism, I was like, "Wait, you guys believe what?" Like at first, the whole predestination thing seemed even worse than the liberalism. But then once I listened to like some Tim Keller sermons, I learned to really fall in love with it, and the elders at my church were big Tim Keller fans, big NT Wright fans. So my church has always had a mix of liberals and not liberals. I didn't really grasp how liberal my denomination as a whole was until I went on a confirmation retreat that year that was hosted not by the church but by the presbytery. And there were the worst, wildest things there. There was a pastor who denied the divinity of Christ. There was pastors who called Tim Keller a fundamentalist when I said I liked him. There was a pastor who called unborn babies a parasite, and They yelled at me for being pro-life. So after this, I came back to my mentor and I was like, I want to leave. I want to join the PCA. But he explained to me, the reason it got this bad is because every generation kept running away when things got worse. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like a vicious cycle. The denomination gets more liberal, so more people run away. So it gets more liberal, so more people run away. And he said there are things about the denomination we need to preserve, and we can't just abandon it. And I didn't understand it at that point. I was thinking, I we just need to leave. I don't know why we need to stay here. But then I went to college, and the good news was I met a lot of more Christian friends. The bad news was the type of Christianity in college when I went to Texas, it was very non denominational, very evangelical. And a lot of it's great. There's a lot of fellowship, a lot of active young people, but something was missing. And what was missing was like any semblance of tradition or connection to the past or being part of some broader institution. And that's when I really saw the value of these old mainline churches. And I also saw tons of people converting to Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy because they're like, I want tradition. I want to be rooted in in the past. And I was like, wait, Protestants do have that. Then I was like, oh, that's from the mainline churches that everyone abandoned. So um, over over my first year of college, I started to formulate the whole Reconquista mindset that I started to notice that every time I started to notice that the more conservative an institution is, the less credible it is. It seems like all that conservatives have done in the past 100 years is run away from stuff,
Hmm.
not just from churches, but I noticed that for colleges, when I was picking out a college, there were a few really conservative colleges, like, Bob Jones or Liberty, but they weren't nearly as academically credible as
Yeah.
other colleges. And I noticed that Christians started the best colleges. Christians started the Ivy League, but they
Yeah.
got hijacked by the left. And then Christians sometimes split off and formed new things that weren't nearly as good. I started to see the same pattern with the universities as there were with the churches and with the cities. In the past 100 years with fundamentalism, the cities is where culture happens, but a lot of Christians decided to retreat from the cities and move to the countryside. So once I saw the parallels between all those things, that's when this whole mindset of Reconquista really clicked for me. So I was like, you know, I'm in the PCUSA. I don't have a good reason to leave. I don't think I should leave because all that conservative Christians have done for the past 100 years is leave. And I don't think that's been a good thing.
Well, in all fairness to some conservative Christians in different places, some of them have been kicked out.
That's true.
Um, but I think you're right. And for example, in the Christian Reformed Church, when in the 1990s, the Christian Reformed Church allowed a local option with respect to women in church office, and about 60,000 conservatives left. And
Right.
what's happening now in the Christian Reformed Church is sort of the other way, where with respect to the votes on same-sex marriage, the conservatives won sort of like 70-30. So now suddenly the Christian Reformed Church is weird right now because it's the progressives who have sort of been the elite, the ones who have been kind of in control of a lot of institutions. Now they're sort of wondering if they should stay or leave, and basically the conservatives are drawing some lines and say, if you stay, you can't do these things. These kind of things won't be tolerated. And this, I don't know, with the Reformed Church of America, Reformed Church in America, I always remember it's the of or the in, but they had a different trajectory, and of course the Christian Reformed Church and the RCA have sort of always been parallel. So no, that's very interesting, and it's a thought that I have seen myself because I bump into PCUSA churches, Episcopalian churches, and you do find all over the place individual mainline congregations and members who continue to maintain let's say, a traditional framework for their belief system, and they continue to stay in the system, but they often sort of kind of hide and they sort of shelter in place. Well, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Now you've gained some visibility, and you've gained visibility as someone who remains in the PCUSA. Have there been have you seen any movement to try to get you kicked out?
Well, sometimes there are a lot of liberal PCUSA pastors who heard about the movement I'm part of, Reconquista, and they sort of flipped out about it on Facebook. There's this Facebook discussion group where a bunch of liberal PCUSA pastors were saying all sorts of things about our movement that were Nazis, that were funded by Putin. That was actually Reddit. That were like, we're trying to get the church to hate queer people. Just
You're getting Russian money for the PCUSA.
I mean, I'm waiting on my check. It hasn't come yet, unfortunately, but
Well,
um,
he's a little tied up in Ukraine right now with
yeah. So, um, there's there's been verbal opposition to not just me, but me and my movement, because I'm part of a movement of 3,000 mainline Protestants,
Hmm.
called the Reconquista. Um, I'm part of a movement that I technically started, but I'm not in charge of it. It's a decentralized movement. Um, and our mission is to try and just build up orthodoxy within the main lines, knowing that once the main lines die out, we're going to be the only ones left. So our strategy is just win by not losing, win by
Yeah,
not leaving.
yeah,
Um, it's a pretty simple strategy because the main lines are in demographic freefall. So all we have to do is just inject like a smallish amount of Orthodox young Christians into these mainline churches. They're going to wait out the storm, and that's what we're doing. So yes, there's a lot of opposition, but what are they going to do? Is the PCUSA General Assembly going to send me a personal note of excommunication? And if I'm gone, there's still other people that are going to be there. If I'm gone, I can still encourage people to stick it out and be there. There was one priest who did sort of get kicked out of the Episcopal Church for supporting us, Reverend Jake Dell. There's an article about him in the Living Church. Basically, this super progressive Union Theological Seminary student lied about him and several other priests who are in our Discord server, and he got basically forced out of the Episcopal Church. But he still encourages us from the outside. He still supports us. He's not like J. Gresham Machen, who got kicked out and then told everyone else to leave with him.
yeah, yeah. And actually, about 20 years ago when I was watching some of the goings on, I actually myself thought, boy, if I joined a mainline church, then I'd really have a fair amount of freedom because do they kick anybody out for anything? And I don't really know. So my question is, do they?
No, no. Okay, so I should clarify what I said. No one's ever really been kicked out of the mainline church. Some people are suspended from ministry. It's very rare when that happens.
Hmm.
Like Walter Kenyon was suspended from the PCUSA or the UPCUSA for not ordaining women. Um, there still are people in the pastors in the PCUSA who don't ordain women. I know some of them. They just have to fly under the radar
Yeah,
because you can sort of get canceled for that. But and there's a lot of many PCUSA churches that openly oppose gay marriage and abortion. This summer, they're trying to change that at the General Assembly. This summer, the progressives are trying to make it so that pastors need to affirm gay marriage. So that's something we're trying to combat. But no, no one ever gets kicked out, especially if you're a layman like me. Even an elder like my dad, you could basically say whatever you want and you're going to be okay.
hmm.
You're going to face social ostracization. You're going to face, social opposition. And that's what we're all facing. I've had a lot of nasty things said about me by progressive PCUSA pastors, but those same people say that it's oppressive to say you want to follow the Bible. So I'm not really, my feelings aren't that hurt when they say that. Uh, and there's a ton of PCUSA pastors who support us, who are part of our Discord, who support our movement. Interestingly, there's a few PCUSA pastors I know who are way to the right of me and most PCA pastors I know. So
Yeah,
it's really a big tent. It's more of a big tent than people realize. And there's a lot of PCUSA pastors who are kind of progressive, but not militantly so.
yeah,
I would say my pastor might fall into that category. He's like a moderate progressive. So there's that. There's a lot of stuff going on, but I'm really interested in the CRCNA because it's sort of mainline. It is an offshoot, but it's an old enough offshoot that it's very historic in its own right. So
well,
it's
I was
mm,
curious when I would talk to Aaron Wren when last year's synod was going on. He said, "Oh, I want to talk to you about that," because there was a Christian Front pastor that he actually knew, and he said, "Well, I always thought the CRC was mainline." The CRC is an ethnic denomination, a historical ethnic denomination that has been trying to mainstream really since the end of the Second World War. It always had elements within it. Let's say I would say an elite minority that say would lean mainline, but the rank and file tend to lean evangelical. And
Right.
so the roots of the CRC were much more of, before the modernist fundamentalist split, the roots of the CRC were much more, say, rural conservative, who separated themselves from the urban churches in the Netherlands. And so then when the immigrant waves came, a disproportionate number of those kinds of people came to America. And then as immigrants kept coming, the because the Christian Reformed Church tried to maintain its Dutch quality for so long, immigrants felt comfortable. And so but because it's an immigrant church, especially since the Second World War, the main focus has been assimilation into the broader American and Canadian contexts. And what that meant was a pull to the mainline or a pull to the evangelical. But the evangelical side, is probably 80-20 evangelical.
Hmm.
So it's just, as assimilation happens in the Christian Reformed Church, it's becoming more and more evangelical, just partly because of the collapse of the mainline, and many people who were sort of assimilated into, for lack of I know this is a controversial term, but it's the only label I've, the urban monoculture, the kind of thing that you grew up in and was basically the default religion of the context that you had. Many of the young people have left the Christian Reformed Church, making it older. And it also means that because the Christian Reformed Church, since the 70s, 60s, and 70s, tried, like the Reformed Church in America, become more racially diverse, it leaned hard into try to bring in other non-Dutch groups, so African Americans, Hispanics, non-Dutch white North Americans, and also Koreans. And so a lot of those efforts of diversity accelerated the evangelicalization of the denomination, so that when the church in the 70s, 80s, and 90s had a fight over women in ecclesiastical office, and then when this fight came about in the teens, a lot of the elites in the denomination, those who leaned mainline, simply assumed the denomination is the same as it was 30 years ago. And what they didn't appreciate was, no, the denomination is quite different than it was 30 years ago. And so then when votes started to be taken in 2022, suddenly that group realized they only basically had 30% of the votes. And
Yeah.
they were going to lose every time. And so in 2022, they thought it was an anomaly. 2023, they realized, oh, shoot, this is a structural issue. And now they're in the process of, what on earth do we do? Because they have tended to be the ones that have had many of the institutions in Western Michigan, and they're seeing that, well, if they leave, they lose their institution. So the irony in the Christian Reformed Church is, it could be the left that decides they want a Reconquista effort to try to maintain themselves, but many of them won't, partly because it is just so heinous for them to have to be a member of a denomination that is maintaining a traditional stance, let's say, on human sexuality. So the Christian Reformed Church right now is sort of like the reverse of what you're looking at. And
I know.
so it's really interesting.
It is. And I part of Reconquista ideology is fueled by the axiom that whenever there's a church split or a university split, but mainly a church split, it's not an equal split. It always splits into original and conservative. Like with the United Methodist split, and the United Methodist Church is probably just several hours away as we speak from officially sealing their fate as a gay affirming denomination. But that only happened because the conservatives left the church after winning the vote. They won the dang vote and left the dang church.
Right.
Yes, I know it was hard. Yes, I know that there were political struggles they had to deal with. But if they really wanted to maintain control of the denomination, they really could have.
Yeah.
So it's always whenever there's a denomination split, like every single split in the Presbyterian Church between liberals and conservatives has been conservatives leaving. Um, That was with the case with the OPC, with the PCA, with the EPC, with ECO, with everything.
Yeah.
And the same is true in the Episcopal Church. Like you have the Anglican Communion, the Church of England, and the Episcopal Church, and then a bunch of conservative offshoots from that. The LCMS, you could say, technically didn't split from anyone. So I guess you could say they're semi-mainline, just like the CRCNA sort of is. But this is the first example I'm really seeing of a progressive group splitting off from the church because the conservatives got their way.
Yeah,
And I'm
they
very
haven't.
fascinated by
Some pastors and churches have, but we've yet to see if that happens.
that.
And this
I
next
honestly am, I'm honestly kind of rooting for it just to see what happens.
well, I've told, because I mean, yeah, I've told this story before. I would have been expected to sort of line up with the progressives, but what's and I think actually I would rather see the progressives try to. I want to see them. Okay, this is your vision, pursue it, and I'd love to see, a way for that to happen. But there, what I think exactly what changed here is that many conservatives in the Christian Reformed Church didn't leave. And then when you sort of had the revealing moment in the last two synods, then the conservatives realized, oh, we're in the driver's seat here. Now, the real question is going to be with those, because it's not just conservatives and progressives, it's conservatives, moderates, and progressives. And whereas for the last 50 years, progressives have tended to vote, or moderates have tended to vote with the progressives, now over the last few years, moderates have been voting with the conservatives. And so that's going to keep the conservative movement sort of in check. They're probably not going to get everything they want, but that's the nature of this kind of politics. So
Yeah.
it's going to be fascinating in the Christian Reformed Church to see what happens. And a lot of it is going to be, will the so what happened in the Reformed Church in America is that there were some classes out east that were very mainline, very liberal, and they basically were implementing, affirming procedures with respect to their church.
Yeah.
The Reformed Church in America, as the Christian Reformed Church, had a significant effort to do church planting and to bring in other leaders, non-Anglo leaders. And of course, that was a progressive cause to diversify the church ethnically. So you had Hispanic, African American, Asian pastors coming into the Reformed Church in America. And then it got to a point that many of these pastors who were quite evangelical were basically saying to the denomination, if you don't do something about those East Coast classes, we're leaving. Now, the Reformed Church is a very old church, and so they have a lot of machinery. And basically, even though the conservatives had a majority in the church, because of the procedures, they couldn't really discipline or dislodge the progressives. The Christian Reformed Church is much newer, and the Christian Reformed Church has a lot less machinery. And basically, the way the Christian Reformed Church works is the majority is going to get its way. There's not sufficient ecclesiastical machinery to prevent a conservative majority from finally disciplining and doing something about a progressive minority. And that was sort of, a lot of people expected it to happen last year. Some high profile moderates basically said, whoa, let's not do this so quickly. But pretty much everyone understands the writing is on the wall. And if progressives want to stay in the denomination, they're going to have to abide by certain things. And
Yeah.
that's probably the way it's going to go. So, but you never know until, things happen. But then the big
Yeah.
questions for the Christian Reformed Church is going to be the institutions. What happens to Calvin University? And Calvin University is right now in the midst of its own crisis because the president had to resign. And that's a huge fight right now. So
Yeah.
the Christian Reformed Church is it's a very lively place right now in terms of politics and drama.
Yes. Yes.
which is not nice to be in. I'll say that.
Yeah. Now, I in terms of like theological, cultural positions, I'm pretty much in line with a lot of conservatives in across the board. Where I disagree with them is I think conservatives keep losing because they don't care about institutions. And this applies to conservatives in basically every Protestant group. Conservative Presbyterians, especially, like the OPC, the PCA types, they simply don't see the value in institutions, whether it's old institutional churches or old seminaries. They have this idea that, you know, if your church is drifting in the wrong direction, you should just split off and start anew. And they think it's like materialistic to care about any of these institutions, not realizing that kind of the reason there are so many Christians to begin with in America is because there's a long institutional heritage of Christianity in America. Um, and I think the reason we're seeing a decline of Christianity is because we've seen a de-Christianization of all the institutions.
Yeah.
Um, I think that no matter how many individual souls you save, no matter how many individual converts you make, you're not really going to make a large scale change until you convert the institutions. What I noticed is that Christians evangelize individuals and the left evangelizes institutions, and that's
Hmm.
why the left always wins on the large scale. I think
I see.
conservatives are going to keep losing until they start caring about institutions.
Are you familiar with Aaron Ren's work?
Oh yeah, I was on his podcast. I He understands my project better than even I understand it.
Yeah, I think he does because he's been playing this song for a very long time about institutions. So this morning I released a video because yesterday I found a piece written by Dr. John Baer. Do you know who he is?
Not sure I do.
He is a he is an Orthodox, big O Orthodox, New Testament scholar out of the UK who wrote a piece on, and now I didn't know any of the background of this. I guess public orthodoxy is sort of the progressive part of the Orthodox Church, and I thought I didn't even know Orthodoxy had a progressive branch, but apparently they do. But he wrote a piece there on. I read the on ecclesiology. I basically read the piece and thought, wow, this reads very Protestant in that the way you just formulated in terms of the left evangelizes institutions. So because of how my YouTube channel and community was shaped, sort of downstream from Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Peugeot, I've a heavy element of my audience are people who, let's say, have joined the Orthodox Church in the last few years, the Big O
Mm,
Orthodox Church.
it's the
It's
trad thing to do.
yeah, yeah. It's really, and then also talking to disaffected Roman Catholics who, they want the Latin Mass or something like this too. So I think you're really onto something in terms of paying attention to the individual institutional dynamic. I think there are going to be a lot of questions about, okay, what exactly are institutions and the degree to which, let's say, modernity is wedded to some of our deep code with respect to institutions. And I suspect that in the next 50 to 100 years, we're going to see that either people have to sort of, as conservatives have been doing, sort of divorce themselves from institutions or take a much more careful look at what institutionalization needs to look at in a postmodern time. It's interesting that one of the dynamics that I saw in the Christian Reformed Church was, so in the last two synods, the conservatives, they have all the votes. There's no question. They have the votes. Here's the thing that I immediately saw. So they have formed in the Christian Reformed Church, there's a group called the Abide Project that sort of became the a pole around which a lot of the conservative activism flowed. They do YouTube videos, they do websites. They're very much a younger group, and culturally they're very different from the, let's say, establishment group that tried to continue to be able to keep the whole family together, lean, progressive, et cetera, et cetera. But I also very clearly saw that the conservatives, as you very much articulated, didn't really seem to want to take over the institutions. They want to make sure that the establishment can't mess with them from those institutions. And so they're sort of let's take apart those institutions so they can't bother us. And we're going to get rid of the Office of Social Justice. We're going to get rid of a bunch of the banner. We're going to get rid of a bunch of the institutions that have sort of been mouthpieces for kind of a Me Too progressivism light in the church that sort of filters through, kind of filtered through a bunch of these things. But the question was, okay, are you going to assume roles in these institutions? And do you have a vision for where these institutions are going to lead the church? And what I've seen so far is no. That, like you said, they don't really have a lot of interest in the institutions, which sort of leaves you to say, okay, you can maybe, if you decide to, you might be able to purge the denomination of some of the most glaring examples of what you're disagreeing with, but what will you leave behind you? And that, I think, that's a really open question in the Christian Reformed Church at this point.
Right. And that recently I've had to rethink some of the Reconquista ideology because at first I thought it could just be fought on a congregational level if you just have enough individual conservative churches in a denomination. If you just get 51% of the denomination to be conservative, then the conservatives win. But you're right, institutions, not just the churches themselves, but the seminaries, the universities, the organizations, those are what matter. And even conservatives in mainline churches tend to have this apathy towards institutions. They tend to see institutions as more of a parasite. And I think my favorite video of yours that got me thinking for such a long time is comparing modern evangelical approaches to institutions to the three groups in the Reformation: the Lutherans, the Calvinists, and the Anabaptists. So correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, but you said the Lutheran approach to institutions is reform existing ones. The Reformed approach would be build new ones. And the Anabaptist approach is simply reject institutions full stop. So if I was to assign people to different things, I would say Jordan Cooper, our favorite Lutheran, is definitely has more the Lutheran mindset. The LCMS successfully purged one of its institutions of liberalism, and that's why the LCMS continues to be conservative. And Jordan Cooper talks a lot about the need to preserve old universities and the value of the Ivy Leagues. An example of the Reformed approach, if this is the Reformed approach, I don't agree with it, but would be Doug Wilson, who is basically says screw all the mainstream churches and universities, but he's trying to start his new university, like New St. Andrews in Moscow, Idaho. He's trying to build a new church. I mean, and I'm just so skeptical as to if that can achieve anything at all ever. I'm massively skeptical. And then there's, of course, the most common approach, I think, is the Anabaptist one. Even in Episcopalian or Reformed or Presbyterian circles, they have an Anabaptist approach to institutions, which is that they say institutions are just going to be petri dishes of liberalism no matter what, so let's just retreat from them. So obviously, I don't like the Anabaptist approach. It's why we lose. I seem to favor mostly the what you would call the Lutheran approach, but I'm Reformed, not Lutheran. So would you say that's an accurate summary of those three approaches?
I think there's a lot of insight into that summary. And I think for the most part, what happened in American evangelicalism is that an implicit Anabaptist ecclesiology has been going, but that's not without it's not without it's really complex because, for example, I mean, you mentioned Doug Wilson. I would probably point more to again, the split of old Princeton into Westminster, Philadelphia compared to old Princeton. And of course,
Yeah.
Westminster, Philadelphia, it's out of there that you get. When I was in the 70s, during the 70s and 80s, when I was young, you had this movement, this urban movement that Tim Keller eventually became the real flourishing of that movement. Roger Greenway from the Christian Reformed Church. And my father, was sort of part of that. There was a movement in the Christian Reformed Church, kind of a back to the city movement, and you had all of these tensions. But I don't think there was enough thought paid to these questions of institutions. Now, I would also point to in our denomination. So one of the guiding lights of our denomination has been Abram Kuyper,
Yes.
but Kuyper is tricky. So Kuyper not only, he was sort of raised in the 19th century version of liberalism and modernism, goes to a country church, sort of gets dramatically impacted by the simple faith of these people there, and then takes all of this animism, founds newspaper, the Free University, another secessionist church movement in the Netherlands, which then again will inform the Christian Reformed Church in the United States, will eventually become the prime minister of the Netherlands, start pillarization, which is sort of a vision for pluralism, and that vision sort of animated a lot of talk in Calvin College in the 70s and 80s. And you can still hear some people sort of throwing around Kuyper's word. But Kuyper is interesting in that there's two sides that really sort of get expressed excitement about Kuyper, and they tend to be conservative and more progressive. And so Kuyper didn't really solve this. And I think what we're dealing with is, even though Anabaptism, because of its anti-institutionality, which sort of is deeply, there's a deep sense of America with that too. Americans
Yeah.
tend to be anti-institutional, anti-intellectual. Um, we haven't really worked out how that works when it comes to the obvious power and importance of institutions when you've got a multi-pluralistic, globalistic context like we have now. So I think the basic analysis is right, but just look at evangelicalism. Evangelicalism, we'll even take a step back. Compare the Church of England with what became the style of the state church in America was the Mainline. But when you say the Mainline, it's a consensus of Episcopalian, Presbyterian, and Methodist.
Hmm.
And there's no central institution between Episcopalian, Presbyterian, and Methodist. What happened was these virtues colonized other institutions such as the United States government. And in many ways, even though the United States government had no state church, arguably the United States government, for a lot of people, became a state church. Lincoln, of course, famously is killed on Good Friday. I mean, Robert Bella in the 60s, watching Kennedy and this transition to welcome the Catholics and the Jews in the mid 20th century into the fold, basically coined the term civil religion. So these tensions that you are dealing with are deep in the stack in terms of the American code, because America managed to do something that the European countries didn't do. We ostensibly had a civil religion without a monolithic religious institution.
Yeah.
Does that make
I
sense?
It does, yeah. It's very interesting. I agree, and I think that you can't really revive a culture without reviving the state church of that culture. If you have a historically Christian culture, you need to revive the state church of that culture. So that I think there is no hope for England unless the Church of England gets revived. I don't think there's any hope for Sweden unless the Church of Sweden gets revived. And I don't think there's any hope for America unless the mainline churches get revived.
Hmm.
Yet, yes, you could have conservatism in the Catholic and Orthodox churches, but America is not a Catholic or Orthodox country. Orthodoxy would be massively helpful to Romania or Bulgaria, but not America. America is a mainline Protestant country. So I I agree, and I think you and Aaron Wren recognize the importance of institutions and institutional churches. I know that there's tension because in America, because we don't have a formal state church, it's hard for people to see how the PCUSA is any more inherently valuable than the PCA. Because if you have this Anabaptist mindset, which an Anabaptist approach to institutions for Americans, especially conservative Americans, is like water to fish. They can't conceive of how you would think of it any differently. They're like, there's the PCUSA versus the PCA. The PCUSA is largely liberal. The PCA is largely confessional. Why the heck would I choose PCUSA over PCA? And in the minds of a lot of my conservative critics, they say, oh, it's because Redeem Zoomer idolizes pretty buildings. Um,
Is that what
and
they tell you?
all the time, yeah. And I will admit some of my rhetoric sounds like that. Like, there's no way to there's no way to visibly prove one group is more institutionally rooted than another, except by physical buildings. That's like, there's a reason that the beautiful First Presbyterian Church at the center of your town is more likely than not PCUSA, and the PCA church in your town is more likely than not either like an ugly, depressing building or rents a public school cafeteria. Um, I think that's the most visible indicator, the most visible fruit of the institutional disparity. But what I really care about is the institutions. We need institutional Christianity. Um, I mean, we don't need it. The gospel is going to survive no matter what. But if we want to see America get even slightly better than it is now, we need institutional Christianity to come back. Um, that's what
The
I think.
the pretty building comment isn't arbitrary, because what we're seeing now with respect to, let's say, um, the Catholics and the Catholics and Orthodox value pretty buildings.
I do too. Yeah, it's not wrong for them to do that.
No, and it's not wrong for them to do that. And it's also not accidental or incidental, because there's a recognition of the instantiation of beauty and the importance of, let's say, architecture with respect to, let's say, a city. Have you had a chance to go to Europe at all?
Well, no, but I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so you go to Europe, and one of the things that you begin to see. So I first time I ever went to Europe was a couple of years ago, and I'm driving through the countryside of the Netherlands because, of course, I've got Dutch genetics in me, and my co-companions are Dutch, and my friend John Van Donk wants to drive me all over the Netherlands, which you can do because it's a small place, and you're just driving through this rural area, and what you see are, well, besides the awful looking not Dutch windmills, modern windmills trying to generate electricity, you see church spires and little towns around them. Because, of course, that the church then at the center of the town with the spire, this is all Jonathan Peugeot stuff, I mean, connects heaven and earth. And
Yeah.
then it flows out into the town. And so, I mean, part of what's happening right now is the question of civilizational faith. And of course, the Catholics and the Orthodox have long histories of civilizational faith. But again, going back to that John Bear article, there's the issues of civilizational religions and state churches became obvious and continue to be obvious when the patriarch of Moscow seems to be in Putin's pocket. And everybody says, How well really is that state church happening? And this is, of course, I was in one group where I heard one person actually articulate, well, we know that the Protestants and the Catholics have been in bed with worldly power. Maybe the Orthodox have avoided that. And I thought, yeah, yeah, just because that whole part of the world was behind an iron curtain for the last little while, you have no idea of the way that religion and politics have worked together, throughout the history of the world. And so I think part of what leads to Protestantism, obviously, were the ways that we saw secular power corrupt the church, and sometimes church power corrupt, you know, corrupt the state. But often it went the other way. That you give these people all of this money and power. Putin, the United States has freezed Putin's assets, and somebody somewhere in the State Department says, well, let's give some of Putin's money to redeem Zoomer. How about that? And then the charge can come true. But so I when I think about all of the issues that I am dealing with, when I think about these problems, these issues are front and center. And what's amazing in the American century, it really reached its peak again about at the end of the First World War, about 1945, the creation of the United Nations, UN, the UN Declaration of Human Rights is a deeply mainline document. I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, these are deeply mainline people. And the amazing thing, again, about the United States was it managed to pull off an ostensibly Christian civilization for a time without a state church.
Yeah.
But then again, there is no what is the mainline church? The mainline church is like talking about the evangelical church. How does
Yeah.
this function institutionally? And so I think these are really difficult questions to grapple with, but they are the questions of the day.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I would define, some people define the mainline church as liberalism, like the media. If you have a member of a non-denominational church who has liberal beliefs individually, the media will classify them as a mainline Protestant. Um, I don't think that's accurate. I think that there's a correlation, but I would define mainline as institutional, like you're saying. If if a church is connected to the institutions of a certain area, I would call it the mainline church. And that's why I'd say there's some semi-main lines like the CRCNA or the LCMS. I call them semi-main lines because technically they're not grouped in the Seven Sisters of the Main Line, but they are institutional enough to be mainline. Same with the Southern Baptist Church, by the way. The Southern Baptist Church, you could call it a mainline church in some ways.
Well,
Um,
that's a super interesting illustration because what see, in these cases too, details matter. Ecclesiology, the details of the ecclesiology really matter. And that was, of course, one of the things that when in 2022 the CRC votes no on same-sex marriage, whole bunch of heads from Rod Dreher to Christianity Today, everyone just is like, what? This isn't supposed to happen. The script is, just as you said, there's a fight. The conservatives say, "Ow, done with it." They form their own thing, and then the progressives inherit the institution, only to have the institution continue to shrink down into nothing.
yeah.
And but the Christian Reformed Church is a weird amalgamation of trying to. It's not congregational. It's not sort of magisterial, sort of. I mean, the CRC has always tried to sort of balance these things, but
Yeah. Now, I will say that I am skeptical of how much ecclesiology really matters for whether a denomination will go liberal or not, because we've seen liberal drift all across the Seven Sisters of the Main Line, whether it's Episcopal or Presbyterian or hybrid Episcopal Congregationalists like the ELCA or whatever the heck the United Methodist Church is. Um, Now, I will say that the Baptist churches have gone the least liberal. Like the American Baptists, American Baptist Church USA, it's gotten a little bit liberal, not that much. But of course, the most liberal one is also Congregationalist, the UCC, United Church of Christ. So I really don't know if
Hmm.
ecclesiology is can really be blamed at all for why a church might go liberal. I think it really has to do with with how the institutions go and whether the conservatives are willing to fight for the institutions, which in the past 100 years in America they really have not been.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a strong point. That's a strong point. I'll have to think more on that. The difficulty is we're trying to conceptualize something that is invisible. I mean, because part of what's happened for me over the last 6 years of whatever it is that's been happening to me with YouTube and all the stuff I've been involved with is we're struggling to reconceptualize how the world works. And
Mhm.
because not only have churches sort of had this crisis of institutions is, it's all over our, it's, medical institutions, government institutions, educational institutions. And part of this has been that there's been these institutions are themselves the products of modernity. And the philosophical epistemic underpinnings of modernity have been receding, and these institutions are falling. Now, Catholics and Orthodox tend to rush in and say, no, 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 we know how to do this. And the rest of us are looking at them skeptically, like, we're not ready to buy into your program. But
Yeah.
what's difficult to know is, okay, what emerges next? Because again, I tend to suspect we're going to have new forms of institutions emerge that, in keeping sort of with all other disrupted patterns, there's going to be elements of the old, but then also innovation of the new that's going to be able to sort of help help things go. Because if you think about, let's say I look at the Christian Reformed Church, I sort of collect Christian Reformed books from the Christian Reformed Church of when I was a kid, and I look at them now through my eyes, and it's like, wow. Because one of the main ways denominations sort of held things together were you have a printing house in your denomination,
Yeah.
and your denomination produces all of the materials, the Sunday school materials, the magazine, the theological books. You have a denominational seminary. And so you sort of have a walled garden here, and you produce everything that your denomination eats. That whole system has been coming apart for the last 50 years. And as we've seen, people are feeding out of a marketplace, not out of a walled garden. They've been feeding out of a marketplace. And what we've seen then is these broad movements, like we've seen, that's sort of lately manifested in, let's say, wokeism. This has been capturing institutions. And then you're not going to be able to keep score by looking at what denominational publishing house things are coming out of. Now you're keeping score by looking at what segment of a marketplace things are coming out of. And what that means is the old way we used to organize was within the walls of a building. The Christian Reformed Church is in the process of selling its denominational building. And when I saw, for example, the successor institution or a successor institution to the Reformed Church in America, the Alliance of Reformed Churches, I know the guys who started this thing, and I'm pretty sure they started it with a cell phone and a laptop. They didn't need a building because they can rent space or whatever, because now we're sort of living on the internet, just like you and I are doing now. And so I I think I think we have to not only wrestle with, okay, this abandonment of institutions by conservatives, we have to wrestle with what on earth are institutions going to be and look like moving forward? And pretty buildings are probably going to have to be a part of it, but we don't quite know how they fit in.
Right. I mean, I know things are getting more online, but it's still just as institutional. Like, for example, when I try to read theology papers from the University of Edinburgh, I still have to pay to read them. Whereas if I don't want to pay, if I just want to like do things for free, I only get surface level stuff. So regardless,
Hmm.
yeah, the internet is probably going to change what institutions look like, but I even so, there's still going to be value in institutions. I do think in some ways I'm the biggest hypocrite in the world because I'm talking about the value of institutions. Meanwhile, I function as a digital Anabaptist. I built up my YouTube channel off of nothing, and I talk about issues I'm not formally educated on. So, in some sense, I'm a massive hypocrite because of what I do in my online presence.
I
And
don't think, I
it's
wouldn't call that hypocrisy. I
mm,
think you are, in fact, embodying the new wave, but you
right.
also have not gone Anabaptist in that, you still value institutions. It's just unclear, so Reconquista, Operation Reconquista. Now, did you start this thing?
Yes.
How did you start it?
I started it online, really. It started out as an online Instagram group chat of like three people. And then it moved to a Discord server of a few hundred people. Then that turned into 1,000. That turned to a few thousand. And then we started some nonprofits emerged out of our Discord server. I started a nonprofit with some other PCUSA members at the very end of 2023 called Presbyterians for the Kingdom, and we just attended a conference in our denomination. The Episcopals did something similar
And
and
you
got
are
a lot
how
of
old?
21. And we got they got I met a lot of Episcopal bishops who like what we're doing. The Bishop of Dallas is great, and the Episcopal. So thanks to the like, we wouldn't have been able to do this quickly without the internet. But it kind of feels like easy come, easy go to me because like, yeah, the internet
Yeah.
can give you um, like I'll be surprised. I'll be surprised if anyone still watches my videos in 5 years because that's the way the internet works.
But I
Um,
won't be surprised if you are still doing, I would be surprised if you're not doing vital work in 5 years.
well, thank you, but um, I still think at the end of the day, it is going to be institutions that matter more because yes, it is the internet that spreads a lot of ideas, and thanks to the internet, a lot of young men are becoming a lot more conservative than they ever have been due to like the trad movements and stuff. But they still lack institutional power. So no matter what they do, the powers that be are still always going to be pushing to the left until something changes in the institutions.
Yeah, and I would bet that a lot of those people sitting in pretty buildings are terrified by you because in some ways you are the Zuckerberg or Jobs or Bill Gates of ecclesiology right now because you are disrupting using technology in a viral way the institutions. The difficulty is you shouldn't feel so bad because this is going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I just did a conversation this week with Jordan Hall, and we were talking about, I'm probably going to have it out on the channel next Monday. But we were talking about basically the MP3 revolution. And you're not old enough to remember this. I'm old enough to remember this. When when digital audio compression met the music industry, it was chaos because it was just the end of the record. Now, the record is still around. The vinyl record is still around. The CD is still around. The Blu-ray is still around. But fundamentally, everything changed. And we are in that kind of a change in terms of the church now, and not just institutions of the church, but even what the local church is right now. And
Hmm.
so the fact that, oh, let me ask you this question. How do you put food on your table?
Me, my YouTube channel. is sustaining me until I can get a real job with my university degree. But I know that my YouTube money is gonna run out real fast because I can't rely on making these viral videos every few months because my ability, I'm running out of viral videos that I can make, and I need to still get a regular non-online job pretty soon.
Well, I don't know what will happen with you, but
Mhm.
I would be surprised if what you're doing doesn't sort of leverage out into a new thing that we can't quite imagine now.
Yeah, I mean, partly I don't want things to change. Part of me just, I hear these stories from like you or other people about growing up in a mainline church, like an ethnic mainline church. And by the way, I have zero Scottish heritage. I'm Jewish and Italian, but I love that Presbyterianism is Scottish. I think it should always be the religion of the Church of Scotland. I think it's the Dutch Reformed, the CRC. It is Dutch. There's nothing wrong with it being Dutch. The Dutch heritage is awesome. So I'm like nostalgic for a time I barely got a sample of.
Yeah.
When like just not just 19 everyone romanticized the 1950s America, just America where there was a
Not
mainline church.
everyone. Not everyone romanticizes it. There's a lot of people that the
Yeah,
1950s were not a great time.
yes, I know. Everyone that I talk to online, and they think I'm super liberal for, I don't know, thinking that a female pastor doesn't nuke a denomination automatically. Um, so, but I am very nostalgic for the time I wasn't there, but the time where every town had Orthodox mainline churches that everyone would was sort of involved in,
Yeah.
and the church was like the center of people's community, and like these physical buildings and institutions mattered a lot, and
Yeah.
there were like these publications of all these nominations that you could read from. It's like I sort of want to recreate that, and what my work might just end up moving more people online. I don't know, but I see the my internet project as just a means to an end to bring that back. But I also know that you can never recreate an old time period. So
Right. 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 Oh, that's super interesting. So talk to me a little bit about the videos that you do make. Where did you get the idea? I mean, because it's really interesting because there are a lot of people who would love to be able to have reliably made some viral videos, and you did it. So
I
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I don't mean to brag, but I do mean to brag because there's a new trend of videos on YouTube that I started, but people don't know that I started it. I unlocked the secret to making a viral video. It's every blank explained in 10 minutes. You use Comic Sans. You talk like you're an idiot. You use a format that anyone can understand. When it comes to making an explainer video, less is more. The fancier your graphics look, the less people will pay attention.
That's true.
Less is more when it
Yep.
comes to explaining something. And there's this other channel called the Paint Explainer who just took my style and secularized it, and he's about to overtake me in terms of subscribers. And ever since him, there's been like 100 copycat channels like the Paint Revealer or the Paint Simplifier, you all using the style of Microsoft Paint and Comic Sans, all making the same videos, and it's gotten ridiculous when people try to do like, I don't know, um, every type of abusive relationship explained in 10 minutes. But for all the pastors out there watching, the way to get a lot of views fast is explain things simply and look unprofessional on purpose. My videos look unprofessional on purpose because it feels like people can understand it. Like, even if you could have a graphic designer, don't use one. Draw little illustrations with a just a mouse and
And look at
Microsoft
Home
Paint.
Math. I just talked to him a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. You know who Home Math is?
No.
Well, the internet is siloed. Home Math does Home Math does explaining videos why young men and young women are not happily getting together reliably. So
Oh yeah. So
same shtick though. I mean, what you just described, it's exactly what he does. And his channel just exploded. YouTube loves it.
yeah. So yeah, these that's the way to do it. Now, I was not intending to become a viral YouTuber. All I wanted to do was my own little niche thing where I play Minecraft and build churches in Minecraft while talking about Christianity. Because I suffer a generational curse. The Zoomer generational curse is a bad attention span. It means we can't really, not only can we not read long books, we can't listen to things unless we're doing something else.
Yeah.
So in high school, I learned theology. Every day, school would suck. I would be excluded and stuff, but I would go home, I would listen to a sermon while I play Minecraft. And Minecraft is an intellectually stimulating game because you're just building things. Um, and it's sort of just like a virtual reality world. You're building things. So I would listen to theology things while I build Minecraft. So I thought, why don't I recreate this experience for other people? Why don't I talk about theology while I just play Minecraft, while I build churches in Minecraft? So my YouTube channel at first was just that. I would talk about theology while playing Minecraft. That never really took off, and I had the only way I was able to get any views at all was I told my Instagram followers to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Um, but then once I made these just Comic Sans Microsoft Paint explainer videos, that is what really made my channel blow up, and then that sort of got more viewers of my more niche content that I wanted to do anyway. So now what I do is I have a Minecraft server where a bunch of Christians build churches together in this virtual reality world. And I guess that's a substitute for not being able to have pretty buildings in real life. At least you can have it in Minecraft.
Wow. Well, talk to me about, okay, so you're at some point the Comic Sans Paint explainer videos in 10 minutes, that's going to come to an end because these things are sort of like Jonah's tree on YouTube. There's a certain way to make videos and it all flourishes, and then a million people run in and make them, and the whole market collapses again, and
Yeah.
then something else will spring up. What would you like to do after the 10-minute explainer video thing collapses? What your dream profession? What would you like to do?
My dream profession is to be like a seminary professor to just have some positive impact on the institutional church.
Hmm.
Because I've always liked thinking about theology. Ever since I became Christian, my drive was to help the church intellectually somehow.
Yeah.
Part of my One of my dreams was to, you know, reconcile Christianity and science because I think the one of the biggest flaws to not flaws, but one of the biggest hindrances to Christianity in the modern world is a supposed and apparent contradiction between Christianity and science, which I don't think exists. I sort of became a Christian once I realized that there is no contradiction between Christianity and science. And I think that, like, one of the reasons why I'm a bit more comfortable in a mainline context, even though I disagree with most of it, is it does give a little more intellectual freedom. That's why it's like, while I agree with conservatives 9 out of 10 times, there's a bit of an intellectual rigidness there,
Yeah.
that I'm just not that's not helpful. Like,
Yeah.
I'm an evolutionist, as most people know. I've done debates on evolution and stuff. So I guess what I would really want to do is to be a seminary professor, or just be involved in the seminary, or just, I don't know, be able to make change for the church, because right now the church is a dumpster fire. Because it's Protestantism is in a massive crisis. The vast majority of Protestant churches are either liberal or ugly and ahistoric. Historic Protestantism is almost dead. There's very that you can find it, but it's just so rare. It's needles in a haystack. So I think Protestantism is the purest expression of Christianity. I think historically, Protestantism has done more for God's kingdom than anything else. But right now, it's in a massive crisis. And I think every Protestant needs to recognize the gravity of the Protestant crisis we live in right now. And that's why we're seeing so many people who start to get into Christianity immediately go Catholic or Orthodox. basically every online personality, like, Candace Owens or whatever, who starts really getting into the Christian cultural conversation goes Catholic and Orthodox because they are not in such a massive institutional crisis like Protestantism is. I don't think their theology is better, but I think right now they're in a bit more of an institutionally healthy place than Protestantism.
Hmm.
So
I
my
know a lot of Catholics that would disagree.
well, the worst they have to deal with is like Father James Martin, maybe, who's like one priest out of a ton, and he's not even nearly as bad as what I regularly encounter in the PCUSA. The
Yeah.
worst the Orthodox have to deal with is like David Bentley Hart. Uh, but what I have to deal with is, I'm lucky if a PCUSA pastor believes in God as a real thing, as opposed to just a metaphor for being nice and BLM. So that's what I have to deal with.
So,
So my
so
dream,
you, go ahead,
yeah,
keep going.
I don't know. You go.
No, so what are you studying?
Now in university, this is why I say I'm a hypocrite. I don't study theology in university. I study math and music. I'm a math major and a music major. Um,
What kind of music
so
do you like?
well, I'm in the orchestra. I play the viola, so I'm in my university's orchestra. I've always been a big classical musician. Music has been a big part of my life. I remember I did become Christian at a music festival
That's right.
because I've always just been a classical musician, and most summers I would go to music festivals that you have to audition for to play like string quartets, orchestras, those things. So I've always been a classical musician. Um, just like my dad's a classical musician,
Oh,
and my fiance, soon to be wife, is also a classical musician. She's also studying
congratulations.
music. Thank you. And now, I understand that you can't really make money with that, so I am also doing a math degree. I am passionate about math. It's mostly just for the money because these every book of the Bible explained in 10 minutes is not gonna. I'm not set for life by doing that, so I need to do something else.
I don't know. The Bible, shoot, why can't I remember there? I mean, the Bible guys, they had all their little drawings for every book in the Bible, and
The
they
Bible
weren't so
Project.
Bible
I
Project,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, I could do YouTube long term, but that's
You
not
don't want to, so
sustainable.
don't. That I mean, YouTube is kind of a. I mean, I'm fortunate in that YouTube is not my main source of income, but
Yeah.
I know people that are trying to do that, and YouTube's a grind. They're kind of just the clock. You got to put out a video every week or 3 days or every day or something or four a
If
day. I mean, it's a
if
lot.
that's all I was doing, I'd have time for that. Right now, I have to balance, being a college student and also making YouTube videos all the time. Um, and sometimes those come into conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, if I could reliably make a lot of money being a seminary professor or a pastor, I think most likely a seminary professor is what suits me a little more.
You'll make
That's
less money as a seminary professor.
I know. So like I don't know if that was where the money was at, I do it. But I do if I'm gonna pursue marriage and children, my first and foremost responsibility will be towards them. However, but I want to help the church as much as I can while doing that. And I'll never have to stop making videos. I just can't rely on that. But that's what I want to do. I want to help the church. I want to help the church however I can, and I don't necessarily want to make the church more conservative because what does conservative even mean? Does it mean going back in time? Well, guess what? We can't do that. Um, I want to. Kingdom theology has been really formative for me. That the goal of being a Christian is not like going to heaven; it's spreading God's kingdom. N.T. Wright is a massive influence. And of course, in order to do that, you need to be faithful to the king. So that means I will oppose any theology that is unfaithful to Christ. And I have concluded that liberal theology is indeed unfaithful to Christ. That doesn't mean you have to be as conservative as possible either. It means you have to be as faithful as possible. Um, and you know that's why I feel a calling to help the church. But right now, the best way to do that, I think, is just to try and fix the mainstream institutions. And I don't know exactly how I can do that, but I know how I can't do that, and how I can't do that is retreatism.
Well, I think it's actually quite good that you're not just planning a career as a celebrity Christian or a YouTuber. I think you should stay in college. I think you should finish that degree. I think you should not let the viola lapse. I think you should definitely marry the girl. And I think probably you'll be happier and healthier if, in fact, you develop a career path that isn't dependent on YouTube, and that you keep this effort, you keep doing this effort as a layman. Because you're right, once you get into the institutions as clergy, well, things will be a lot more complex then.
Yeah,
And you're right, as a layperson, you got a lot more flexibility.
I like being a layman because it means I can say whatever I want.
Yeah,
Uh, Most of the things I say I could not say if I was clergy.
yeah,
And I know a lot of clergy who agree with what I say silently, but they can't say it themselves,
yeah,
understandably, because the one clergyman who did say it out loud got fired.
yeah.
Reverend Jake Dell, justice for Dell. But but because I'm a layman, I can say whatever I want. But the thing is, this whole thing can't be run by laymen, so it's a bit of a paradox for me. It's like, how do I get people into the institutions while not being exactly in the institutions myself? I feel like I'm just being an armchair quarterback, uh, by doing that.
Well,
By
you're Protestant. You know, you have the priesthood of all believers.
Yeah,
You shouldn't. It's a real problem when, as a Protestant, it's a real problem when the laity cede the church to the clergy
yes,
as a Protestant. Now, if you're Catholic or Orthodox, I'm not going to talk about the Orthodoxes. I have no idea the way they're managing their stuff after reading what I read yesterday. But as a Roman Catholic, the church is, and that's why right now, and this has been true for a while, ecclesiology is really sort of the part, it's the loci, it's the part of church theology that is really in play right now, because
yeah,
deeply wrestling with we're deeply wrestling with anthropology,
yeah.
and so therefore we're wrestling with ecclesiology. And so no, I wow, well, yours is quite a story. Yours is a very interesting story. That's very
Well,
interesting.
well, thank you. And my fiance has helped me along the way a lot as well. We've sort of figured out a lot of these things together. Although she's, unlike me, she was a Christian her whole life, ever since she was baptized as a baby in a Presbyterian church, which is very based. Um, but yeah, I don't know exactly how I can help the church if the institutions seem so rigged against us. It's like, yes, I was able to get 3,000 young men in the mainline churches to, yeah, sort of gather together and try to put up a fight. But I think you're right. It's either the institutions or nothing. So, um, and also there's always tension between me and PCA people or people in any conservative offshoots. Because it's like, yeah, we agree on our faith. We have the same faith. But there's always like, if I'm going to try and help conservatives or help, theologically orthodox Christians win, I have to criticize their strategy, and
Yeah.
I have to try and be careful to separate criticizing their strategy from criticizing them.
Yeah.
Like I often say, I like everything about the PCA except its existence. I like everything about the ECO except its existence. I like everything about the ACNA except its existence. These are people that I have the same faith as,
Yeah.
but I think if they want their faith to flourish, they have to not do what they did.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. And I actually think I think you're right. I think your basic insight about conservatives fleeing institutions is correct. And I think it's a crisis. And I don't think anybody has an answer. But yeah, me, you, and Aaron, we'll take them on. I'm with you. I'm with you. And I think it's I think it's really important because, I mean, one of the big things we're wrestling with is pluralism. And even though a lot of conservatives start their own institutions to try to defy pluralism, the multiplication of institutions is itself pluralistic. So we're and again,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, well, maybe I do want to criticize just kind of cutting and running. Even if you're cutting and running to sort of create your new holy huddle. But the history of creating these holy huddles has been that this dynamic keeps begetting itself again and again and again and again. And
Yeah.
then we just have the sort of fragmentation that we have, which, as you say, has left conservatives deeply weak in
Yeah.
the world. I mean, we're living in a strange time where it's hard to know who actually has hegemony, because the entire ethos of the counterculture has been opposition to the man, and then the dog caught the bus, and they are the man, and now they don't know what to do. And yeah,
Yeah.
I look at a bunch of like I'm on the same page with you with Doug Wilson. I mean, I listen to all that they're doing, and I listen to their words, and I basically say, okay, you're in Moscow, Idaho. Call me when you get to Boise. I mean, Boise, Idaho, not that big.
Call me
And
when you get to New York City. Like, um,
exactly.
something I also think is that being conservative is a lot more impressive if you're outside of your comfort zone, if you're in a hostile environment. Someone who's a conservative and they're a Columbia professor in New York City is, like my mentor, a lot more impressive than being a conservative in rural Alabama where no one
Right.
cares.
Right.
Um, I think that the this retreatist mindset from the cities and like going off to the rural areas is not what the apostles did. Even though Tim Keller was a retreatist in some sense because he was very into planting new churches and stuff instead of taking old ones, he was absolutely right that cities are where culture matters.
Yeah.
And a lot of like you'll see this on Twitter when I say like we need to retake the cities. They're like, no, the cities are full of black people and I can't go there. I want to raise my kids in a good place. And it's like they see Christianity as carving out your little bubble separate from everyone who's slightly different than you, whether theologically, racially, culturally. Um, that's all that this like Doug Wilson masculinist Christianity really amounts to, unless you're Aaron Renn. Aaron Renn is super based, but that's what it's really all about, and that's not what the apostles did. The apostles didn't move to farms and start families, and the apostles went out of their comfort zones. And yes, you will be put in more of a dangerous position, but that's what we're called to do. Jesus says we're called to suffer and stuff. So yes, I'm in a much more hostile environment being in the PCUSA than I would be in the PCA. But Jesus doesn't call us to find comfort zones. Like we make fun of liberals for being snowflakes that need a safe space. It's mostly the conservatives that do that. The liberals are the ones who leave their comfort zones, who hijack hostile places and make them into their own places. So it's a lot more impressive standing for your principles in a place that disagrees with them. So I recently made a video that was very controversial where I said non-denominational churches straight up shouldn't exist. And what I was saying was not saying non denominational Christians are bad Christians. I was not saying non denominational pastors are bad pastors. I was not saying non denominationals are less good Christians than we are. I think in many cases they're better Christians. Many of the most devout Christians I know are in non denominational churches. I think the structure of non denominationalism is infinite denominationalism. Every non-denominational church is its own denomination. Every non-denominational pastor is his own pope. And like you're talking about, it's the infinite fragmentation of the institutions. So like the motivation for being non-denominational is, oh, I denominations divide the church. I just want to be Christian. If you don't want division, why are you in a system that produces an infinite amount of distinct denominations? So a lot of people say, "Oh, if you think there should just be one denomination, why not be Catholic?" Well, there's a difference between saying there should be one denomination and there is one denomination. If you think there is one denomination, then you have to choose which one it is, whether Catholic or Orthodox or Oriental or whatever. I think the classical Protestant perspective is that there should be, but due to human sin, there just isn't. But we should still be as united as possible within that.
Well, I'm looking at your channel here, and non-denominational churches should not exist. I could see where that touched a nerve.
I I had to have a clickbaity title. That's how YouTube works.
That is indeed how
If this
YouTube
was an
works.
academic paper, I would have titled it something like the structural problems with non-denomination. No one's going to click on that. My audience is like 14, okay? So,
And then, oh, very interesting. Very interesting. All this fascinating. Fascinating.
I agree with what you're saying that like where does the institutional splitting end? It really doesn't under the model of most conservatives, and that's why conservatives are correlated with non-denominationals and liberals are correlated with mainlines because conservatives are just allergic to institutions these days.
Well, this has been fun. Any questions for me or anything you wanted to talk about that I haven't sort of led you into? This has been fascinating getting to know you.
Yeah, so your videos talk about a lot of like super interesting topics that I wouldn't even think to think about. It's like I just scroll through your channel and it's just like, oh, the tensions between heaven and earth, shrines and stuff, and it's like, you've sort of made yourself like a reformed Jonathan Pajot in some ways. What I haven't seen you do a lot of discussions on toying with ideas that are present in the culture, and it's super interesting. I recommend your channel to all sorts of people, but I haven't seen many videos talking about what you believe personally. You don't seem to talk about that as much. Is there a reason for that, or am I just missing something?
Well, you could watch all of my sermons and Sunday school classes because it's full
Yeah,
of what
sure.
I believe. Um,
So, what are your theological beliefs specifically? That's sort of what I'm wondering.
I'm a
Like, what
I'm
are
a
they?
Dutch Calvinist. I mean,
Nice.
I feel very at home in the Christian Reformed Church. I feel very at home with the Heidelberg Catechism. There's some people really want me, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it to actually walk through the Heidelberg Catechism on my channel.
You should.
And I think I really should because what you just said is a common complaint, sometimes criticism of me, that I am not sort of showing my cards. And there's a tactical reason why in the process of a conversation, I don't often show my cards because number one, I want to know what you think. I already know what I think. I'm a very selfish YouTuber. I already know what I think. I'm curious about what you think. And so whenever I'm sitting in a conversation with someone, I am really working hard to find out what they think, usually along the lines of things that interest me. I would say you can go to my church channel, and there are many, many videos of me preaching and teaching, and you will hear exactly what I think about a whole range of things on my church channel. Now, it's also the case that in the process of preaching and teaching in this local church, that is by no means like my YouTube audience, I am not sitting out here banging on a drum around any of the dozen hot button issues that are in the culture right now. And
Yeah, well,
that I intentionally try to minimize because does YouTube really need more of that? I don't think so.
no.
And I find it more interesting to develop relationships with people and to hopefully develop a network of relationships between people, of people who have differences but can actually talk about their differences in an interesting and fruitful way, because that's
Yeah.
actually how we learn.
I agree. I think I do discussions with people on from a wide range of issues on my channel and on other people's channels. I've done discussions with um, very gay affirming pastors, very liberal, very progressive pastors. I've also done discussions with people who would be considered part of the alt right, and I'm just sort of I have friends on both sides. So I would like to conclude with a sort of a request from you almost. I don't care what you think about any of the cultural issues about, trans and women's sports. You're right. There's enough videos on that on YouTube. I really don't care. That's not why I watch theological channels. Um, there is a severe lack of good reformed content on YouTube.
Yeah.
The Most of the reformed content that's on YouTube is very Baptistic or evangelical, like
Yeah.
Ligonier. Those guys are good guys, but it's what I would call Presbyterian. It's not.
Gotta write that
A lot
down.
of it. Well, it's like
Presbyterian. That's good.
it's like half the people, the majority of their audience is like Reformed Baptists.
Yeah.
They never really talk much about like the sacraments. It's mostly just about the 5 points of Calvinism.
Yeah.
And there's also Reformed Forum, which is okay, but they're very partisan. That they're a very specific school of Reformed theology, and they pretend that that's the whole school. So I've always longed for a reformed Jordan Cooper because Jordan Cooper is like he's a Lutheran pastor. You know Jordan Cooper. You've done
Yeah.
talks with him,
Yeah.
and he just makes like really advanced high level Lutheran theology
Yeah.
super easily
Yeah.
accessible.
Yeah.
And he has made a lot of people Lutheran. And it's like when I'm trying to um when I'm talking to someone who's like deciding what denomination to be, and they're considering like Eastern Orthodox, I often tell them become Lutheran, even though I'm not, because Lutheranism just has so much better resources. So I think it would really help the Reformed world if you made videos on Reformed theology or like answering objections to Reformed theology.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, Redeem Zoomer, you have this huge platform. Why can't you do it?" Well, because I'm not qualified to do it.
Yeah.
And every time I try to make content, like sort of, especially if I try to make content that's like apologetic of Reformed theology, it just gets ripped to shreds.
Yeah.
Everyone saw my discussion with Jay Dyer that I was tricked into a debate that I wasn't prepared for,
Oh
because
no.
because he's been an apologist for 20
Yeah.
years, and
Yeah.
I'm a Minecraft YouTuber. So yes, if I could make this sort of high level reformed content on the internet, I would, but I'm not educated enough.
Yeah.
And you seem like someone who is, someone who
I
could do
don't know that I am. I am not primarily a theologian. I'm a
it.
pastor. And
Right.
I remember Keller always made that distinction too, and it was important. And it wasn't that Tim Keller didn't read books. It wasn't that Tim Keller didn't know stuff, but the primary focus was on the people. And
Right.
so when I first started my YouTube channel, I'd have a lot of people coming to me and they'd ask for church recommendations. And I would go to the yearbook of the Christian Reformed Church and I'd try and find a Christian Reformed Church maybe that they could get
Yeah.
close to. And I sort of gave that up because the not because I had a problem with the Christian Reformed Church, I don't, and not because I have a problem with my colleagues in the Christian Reformed Church, I don't. I think pastors get a bad rap on the internet because
Mhm.
most of the really good pastors are just doing their job and they're not on the
Right.
internet. But I think you're right in that I had this conversation with Gavin Ortland last week where he noted with something that I have noted that ironically, even though Protestants tend to be the vast majority of Christians in North America, they're not terribly well served on YouTube.
Nope.
And so you know, I was working on, I'm still thinking, and I actually made a couple of PowerPoints for this Heidelberg Catechism series. I probably should do it for that reason, but it won't be. A lot of people sort of want to get nerdy about theology, which is great, but most of those people are going to be theological nerds, and YouTube is really for a lot of autodidacts. I My heart is mostly trying to help people be Christian. And
Yeah.
because I've been in this space with a lot of Orthodox, if someone, when I see someone coming alive in Christ and they've done so because they've been going to an Orthodox church and the Orthodox priest is faithfully catechizing them and basically helping them grow in Christ and giving them Christian discipline box to grow and flourish and start a family with and do all that in, I cheer them on. I am not going, I am in that way, I am very much an advocate of mere Christianity. People
Right.
need to find a room that fits them. But I
Right.
think you are right. And there have been a number who have really leaned into me on this and say, you do have a burden to your own tradition. People might find that I am quite broadly, I am completely at home confessionally in my tribe. Um, but I am broadly Christian in that sense. And so again, if you listen to if some if someone listens to my sermons, not just the rough drafts, because rough drafts, when I say they're rough drafts of my sermons, they are rough drafts. If they
Yeah.
listen to my sermons or they listen to my Sunday school class, which was on there, um, they will hear what I think, and they will find that I am kind of a mixture. But I think most of the Christian Reformed Church is kind of that way, and I think many pastors are that way. Part of what's breaking down is that Protestants are learning from Catholics, and Catholics have been learning from Protestants, and now the Orthodox are coming into the mix, and all the different tribes within Protestantism are learning from each other, and so there is a common Christianity that is emerging that can find a degree of comfort with the distinctives of the traditions. And so most of my Christian teaching is going to be kind of like that. Now, I think that is deeply within the Reformed tradition, because if you look, for example, at why Calvin's institutes became so popular, in that what John Calvin did was, he took from Lutheran, he took from church fathers, he sort of created a broad Christian substratum out of which then Reformed Baptist and Methodists and most of the players in the Christian card, including many people who have roots in Anabaptism, have drawn deeply from Reformed theology. And it is, I think, the basis of the majority Protestant theology that we find in America and in evangelicalism. It's just not
Yeah.
recognized as Reformed because Reformed has sort of become to mean some of the distinctives. But so people, often I will say, well, this is what I believe because I'm a Calvinist. And a lot of people come at me and say, that's not Calvinism. You're just being a Christian. I say, okay, I will. So
That's fair. That
but I think you're right in that I really should. Part of the reason I've been hesitant to do this is it is so easy. Once I do something like this, then there's sort of a pile on from the autodidacts, the tribal autodidacts that want to sort of pick it apart and say, well, this is this and this is that, and it's not this and it's not that. And I just see this food fight on YouTube over doctrinal bickering. And I think, I don't know who this is helping. I want people to be Christians. And I realize that takes form within the traditions, but I think learning to love your enemies is basic Christianity. It's not a master class.
right.
And the I think the mere Christianity that Lewis tried to get at is where I would rather see someone be growing in the fruit of the Spirit, being faithful to their neighbors, being able to manage a family, being a good neighbor, participating in society in an appropriate way. I would rather see them capable of doing that than being a theology nerd. And we're going to have theology nerds, and God bless them. We need them. They have their function. But I I see people catechized by YouTube, and they're losing the primary things because they're all excited about what people are fighting about.
Hmm.
And I want them to grow in the primary things. And so that's part of the reason why I've tried not to really push hard on my Dutch Calvinism.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I would say that no one's expecting you to be like this nerdy theologian who dives deep into debates and really takes a firm side on them. I think there's two reasons that we still need better reformed content on YouTube. Number one, there's just a lack of resources. So a lot of times when people want to learn what reformed theology is, they just aren't getting good they aren't getting accurate or historically informed sources. Uh, and the second reason is mere Christianity is good. I am an ecumenist just like you. I disagree with a lot of more conservative Reform people. I think that if someone goes Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, they're still a Christian. I think Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy are true Christianity. Uh, the issue is that right now, the current trend is to leave Protestantism and join those traditions based on the accusation that Protestantism is heretical.
Yeah.
And if you are on any sort of young men's Christian forums today, you'll hear constant attacks against Protestantism that it's heretical. So I think Gavin Ortland might have said this. I still have to watch your guys' discussion, but I do think the goal shouldn't be to try and attack other traditions, but defending Protestantism, I do think that's a duty we all have, and I try to do it. But every time I try, it's very bad because I'm not someone who's qualified to do it, and it always ends up just getting ripped apart online. So we need someone more qualified to do that. And Gavin Ortland has been doing great work, but the more the merrier.
All right. Well, I'll continue to process this, and we'll see if
Yeah.
my series on the Heidelberg Catechism makes, you know, comes out on my channel, because I've actually been working on kind of an
I think that'll
introduction
be
to
good.
that. But my challenge is I want it to both work for the people in my church and work for the internet. And
Mhm.
most of the people in my church do not watch YouTube. Some of
Yes.
them do, but most of them don't. And it's got to work for both. And so figuring out how to do that well, it's not easy. It's not easy. So,
All right.
well, Richard, this has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed
Yep.
talking to you.
Likewise.
Hopefully we can talk again. I'm fascinated by what you've been able to do, and I think it's truly remarkable. I think good for you. I just want to celebrate, and I'm super happy
Thank you.
you're still in college, you're engaged to be married, and I'm just really inspired by what you've done,
Thank you.
and I hope God continues to bless you, and I'm sure he'll continue to do some really interesting things through you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Richard. Hope to talk to you again sometime.
You too. God bless.
Okay. Bye-bye.